everybody, and welcome to Fraudible, the official podcast of the International Society of Economic and Criminology. And Fraudible is the video podcast that brings together academics and practitioners to discuss all things fraud. In this episode, we are discussing fraud and prisons, and I am so excited to be joined by academic and Dr. Jonny Gilbert and practitioner Alex Wood. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you here. Jonny, would you mind giving a brief introduction into your background, your experience with prisons, and also what you do now as well?
Yeah, no problem. Okay. And thank you for the invite.
Anytime.
So yes, no, I was a former solicitor in a multi-million-pound mortgage and bank fraud. And I went to prison in 2014. I was handed down initially a 14-year prison sentence, but it was reduced by 2 years because I pleaded guilty at the start of the trial. So yes, I had, being a professional enabler, you are kind of hit with kind of multiple jeopardy. You know, when I resigned from my firm in 2009, initially the civil lawyers jumped on everything, froze bank accounts down. I was bankrupted within 3 months. The regulators were knocking on the door. I was struck off the following year. The police then finally arrived because they realised what's gone wrong. They'd gone through some of the evidence. And then I was just waiting for 4 years to go to jail, really. So it was a very, very long journey. And then being hit with a 12-year prison sentence and starting my prison journey at HMP Wandsworth was, incredibly, difficult and challenging, put it that way.
And what do you do now for work?
I lecture in financial crime and criminal law at the University of West of England at Bristol. And I do a lot of consulting and presentations, sharing my insights into a professional enabler's role in financial crime, working with the Home Office and the regulators, etc., just to kind of get the message out there to assist with crime prevention. Or I don't think you're ever going to prevent financial crime. Financial crime reduction, I think, is probably a better way to approach it.
Well, thank you very much, Alex. Same to you.
Similar. Well, yeah, although I didn't start off in anything quite as legitimate as being a lawyer. But no, I've served, I think, in total 8 years across 3 different prison sentences for different types of financial crime. Everything from, as you know, pretending to be the 13th Duke of Marlborough through to committing vast authorised push payment fraud. So again, I started my prison journey in Wandsworth, and that seems to be quite a common thing for us fraudsters. So the fraud court for London is, of course, Southwark Crown Court, and the feeder prison for that is Wandsworth. So that's where I first came across Jonny and your co-defendant, Mark Entwistle.
That's right.
But yeah, so and then similar sort of journey of, I guess, rehabilitation and reformation to Jonny. So I now, consult for large financial institutions, including some of those that I defrauded, and government departments, again, similarly with Jonny, Home Office and the NHS and the Financial Conduct Authority, and do lots of presentations. So yeah, it's nice that we're now all on this more constructive path, I think.
Indeed.
Absolutely. So let's sort of start by debunking some myths, right? Because whenever people think about prisons, they will usually say that they have access to TVs, to PlayStations. They have lots of contact with their family and their friends. And some people would say it's quite cushy. And you hear about different levels of security in these prisons as well. So the experiences that you would have had wouldn't have been the same for others who have committed, for example, murder or rapes or other crimes like that. So to either one of you, what was your experience like?
I'm sure Alex will agree with me shortly, but my time in Wandsworth in central London was incredibly challenging. It was you encountered violence on a daily basis, violence with other offenders, prisoners, but against prison officers as well. Huge amounts of criminality. You could smell kind of cannabis being smoked in addition to violence. Phones. I think one of my very early pad mates, it was quite funny actually, because I was on the top bunk, because you normally you graduate ironically to the bottom bunk. I was on the top bunk writing a letter home to my wife, and my pad mate says, "You okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm okay. What are you up to?" And I just answered him, but then I realised he was on a mobile phone. I didn't know he was chatting to his brother. So it's that kind of, it's that realisation that, you're in that kind of community where you're with all fellow criminals, and what I did was, it was crime. It was a significant role in a multi-million pound mortgage fraud. I always knew I'd go to jail, but then you are in that community and you are rubbing shoulders with other criminals, and it's it's very challenging. But then it does get better. If you're an offender, because you go from standard to enhanced. So if you get enhanced, it means then you can, save up to get, the PlayStation or things like that. But it doesn't come on your first day in. Your first day in, I didn't have any clothes, so I just had the prison sort of joggers and T-shirts and the rubber boots. But over a few months, you start saving up a little bit. You get enhanced. You get a bit more. You get spends coming from your savings. That allows you to get phone credit to ring home. So it's a gradual thing. But those offenders that break the rules, then it is like snakes and ladders. They're going up the ladder, and then they're straight down the snake. Square one again.
Alex?
Yeah, very much agree. For me, the hardest portion of any custodial sentence, all three occasions, was that first 2 weeks in custody. So, even if you arrive with 500 quid in cash on you, you don't have any access to that, because it all has to be, I think it drips down into your available spend to about £20 a month. But that first week or so, you can't order any canteen, because you need the money to be applied to your account. So you're living really in quite straitened conditions. And I remember in the first week in Wandsworth developing this sort of rash under my arm because I didn't have any deodorant, and and just having to use it. Do you remember these, Jonny, the little sachets of shower gel that just seems to take a layer of skin off? I mean, it's really horrible stuff. And then before you, so if you can't get your own clothes until you're enhanced, and so and that means your family can then send you in a clothing parcel, trainers and so on. So again, for that first few weeks, and until you can get a clothing parcel, it can take you 3 months to get enhanced, of course. You have to sort of prove that you can behave. But it was really, really, really horrible. So you have to wear these horrible prison clothes. I think you get sort of 2 vests a week, maybe 3 or 4 T-shirts, a pair of joggers, and it's just really quite unpleasant. And for me, those first 2 weeks were so bad. I found it really, really tough. And it was equally hard to be able to contact home and contact loved ones, and again, because you didn't have credit on the PIN phone. So it's really, really upsetting. And I think that taught me, well, it should, of course it didn't, because I ended up doing 3 sentences, but that first 2 weeks really should teach anyone the lesson. After that, it's a gradual ramp of improvement. But and I totally agree with Jonny about the violence. I mean, I'd never really witnessed a fight before I went to prison. And a lot of fraudsters, if you commit fraud, you commit bank fraud or something, you're a solicitor, you won't have seen violence like this. But these are, you see people from rival gangs slashing each other in the shower and covering each other with boiling water with sugar in it, and all sorts of horrendous stuff. I don't get too graphic, but I remember in the first month of being in Wandsworth, seeing somebody who'd ripped the plug out of his kettle. So he was swinging this plug round and hit his opposite gang rival, I guess he was, and caught him in the eye and took his eye out. It's really difficult going from having witnessed no violence at all in your life, occasionally a scrap on the rugby field or something, but nothing like that, to witnessing war-like.
Because that's the thing, although we were there because it's obviously the prison that caters for Southwark and the financial criminals, there's huge amounts of gangland issues there.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that on the exercise yard every Sunday there was a little area just behind this brick built structure that the gangs used to kind of pitch their youngest sort of member against another, and it was just kind of bare knuckle fighting, and it was just the kind of that brutality that I agree with Alex. I played rugby for years and seen dust-ups on the rugby pitch, but it's a very different level altogether.
Yeah.
And also picking up on Alex's point about ringing home, the hardest thing for me was the homesickness. I was just absolutely, it hit me like a freight train. I just knew I was stuck. I had this 6 years to navigate now. And remember, with fraud, it takes so long to investigate and prosecute.
Yeah.
I was arrested in 2010, so this is 4.5 years later. So for that whole time, my wife was working and I was bringing up our young children. So it was just, it was just profound, that feeling of emptiness. And you sleep, but I slept really badly, but you doze the early hours of the morning, and then you'd wake up and you've had a dream about being in the back garden at home, and then you look around the cell and it's like a real punch in the guts again, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, Jonny, about dreams. Like I always find my dreams are a few months behind reality. And so when I'm in prison, I dream about being with my family. But then when I got released, I dream about being in prison.
Yes.
Oh.
And then you have a dream, you think you're in jail, and then you wake up.
That's a nice feeling, though. Is you wake up and it's like Christmas morning.
Absolutely.
Because you're free. Yeah, you can make a cup of tea and walk your children to school or do whatever you commonly do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Alex, I've seen in a couple of interviews that you've described prison as like a crime school.
Yeah.
And I guess that's sort of backed up by the fact that I think I heard in another interview that you did that 45 minutes after you were released the first time, you were already offending again.
Yeah.
So the first couple of weeks sounds dreadful, absolutely horrible. But then as you get further and further into your sentence, it sounds like you sort of become acclimatized and the environment changes, and then you sort of go back to the way you were. Is that accurate? It's
interesting, really. So in places like ones, in fact, the entire prison estate, but fraudsters are 99% of them categorised as being low risk, and so they'll get there enhanced quickly. They'll know how to play the system. They'll be able to sort of socially engineer the officers and get the best cells. And I used to have I remember the number H209 on Trinity Wing. It was the big double listeners cell. I had that, and a huge double-sized cell, just from sort of social engineering the officers. But so fraudsters end up on these sort of enhanced wings together, and inevitably, if you're in for a financial or acquisitive crime, you're going to talk about the assets you used to have, sort of almost boasting about the cars and the watches and the flash life you had, how you got caught. And my experience, I know Jonny's not fallen into a sort of spiral of reoffending, but I did, and I met people who, for example, when I was in for the fake Duke offences, people from these big organised gangs, the organised fraud gangs, saying, okay, you're very clever defrauding these hotels. You're obviously very, very good at committing fraud. Living in somewhere like Claridge's for 7 months without paying a penny and without being asked for a card. But you're coming out to nothing. You've evaded hotel bills, but it's actually a bit of a stupid offence because you're not coming out to much money. Like, you could have done what we did, and you might do an extra year, but you'll come out to millions. And that's how these conversations go. And before when I was committing these very basic fraud offences, I wouldn't, if I suddenly made £1 million, I wouldn't have a clue how to launder it. But again, I would meet people in prison who were expert money launderers, for example, and they were like, well, no, you need our network. We need you because of your voice and the way you can talk to potential victims. So my experience was that, unless somebody is very, very committed to rehabilitating, they're going to be meeting people inside who can help them to do things a lot better and a lot bigger. And that's why I call it a sort of crime squad. And it's not just for fraud. I mean, it could be for house burglars will meet other house burglars, or they'll find a dodgy antiques dealer to get rid of stuff they steal from house. There's this whole network of people you meet. I don't know if that's your view, Jonny.
No, it's certainly my view. Prisons are universities of crime, aren't they?
Yeah.
You're forced into the situation where you're, networking with other criminals. So there is, kind of shared system of beliefs, crime commissioning tips, etc. So it does transcend to that. I was in, when I left my open prison, there was somebody who just left ahead of me, and I thought he was rehabilitated, and then he got arrested within a few months because he got involved in another drugs conspiracy with somebody else that he was in jail with. So there was, forging these new links, etc. For me though, the consequences of my actions, and my offending, from 2009, I was deeply remorseful about what I did. Really impacted me as a person. I had no self-belief in myself anymore. So, I wanted to take prison on the chin. I thought I deserved to be here. What I've done is that bad. So take it on the chin and just kind of move forward. So I used my prison centres as a means of rehabilitating myself, personally, because it was the right thing to do for my family, and everybody believed in me. And it's actually ironically given me this huge second chance now. I've gone from a solicitor to a disgraced solicitor, and now I'm a university lecturer. So I feel incredibly blessed. So from my perspective, I wasn't looking to network or to, get together with other enablers to come out and offend. I wanted to make a change and try and earn that self-respect back again.
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of, re-engaged with education. And that was my companion on a very long journey.
And Alex, when you went to prison the first time, did you think, right, this is me done, I'm going to do this, get out, and then I'll be a changed man? Or did you think, well, I can maybe do a bit more?
I thought I got hit with a bit of a long sentence, and I was very, very pissed off with the establishment, if you like, pissed off with the justice system. And yeah, I wasn't thinking. I was also sort of in my mind thinking, it's very, very difficult for me now to get a job. And I thought, if something comes along, and I was never going to go into drug importation or anything like that. I was never up for risking a massive sentence, but I certainly didn't learn my lesson. And then as the sentence developed and went to open prison and just meeting more and more sophisticated offenders, I just thought, F it, why not just be a criminal? And that was what I did, with very, very devastating consequences, of course. But I often think, had I been given, a suspended sentence or a caution or told, look, this is how close you got to going to jail, this is what jail's like, it would wreck your life, and had I been given that chance, I think, because I never got the suspended, I never had a community order in my life, I've never had a caution, it's always been straight to jail. But I think had I been given that option or another alternative, I might have taken a different path. I might have thought, it's not worth doing this again. But as it was, I ended up in that sort of vicious cycle, and it became a bit of a revolving door.
Yeah.
And so people will often complain on open forums that criminals deserve to be put away for, years, forever, and that no sentence is ever long enough, blah, blah, blah. But from what you describe, it's a way of trying to keep dangerous people off the streets. But then arguably you could say that they are becoming potentially more dangerous inside, given the circumstances and who they meet and interact with. So in your experience, is a prison sentence actually useful? Is it a way of making people think, I shouldn't be doing this? Is it an effective punishment for financial crime, in your view?
I think certainly prison sentences are going up. You know, it was a decade or so ago. You'd have fraudsters going away for kind of 18 months for quite, significant, £300,000-400,000 kind of investment frauds and scams. The Fraud Act increased the sentence from 7 to 10. I was at 14 because some very high level frauds, they can go up much further. It was very aggravating in my situation because I was that solicitor. I was a gatekeeper at the end of that, process, and I could have said no at any time. So I do think the sentences are going up. Certainly Southwark, all the judges really kind of smash you there. It was ironic because I did appeal the sentence because my barrister thought it was excessive. And we used a case. There was a solicitor up in North Wales did exactly what I did, quite a significant value for 20 million or something, and he got less than 4 years and he ran a whole trial. So he would have been out within 14 months on tag at home, and I was six years behind a door technically. So, but no, I do think this, you do need to look at the sentences for fraud. They need to be set at a certain level to literally deter people who want to engage in financial crime and punish those that do. Because I think Alex will agree with me. I found prison very punishing. I didn't find it as an establishment where you could easily rehabilitate. There's courses and there's facilities within prison that you can engage with. But I wanted to do a master's at Portsmouth, where I know you're studying, Claire. But I had to self-fund, because you don't get any funding for anything postgraduate. Then when I did my PhD at Cardiff, whilst an open prison, once again, I had to self-fund. And then when I came out, I had to finish that. So I wasn't then working. So I had to, my wife was working, so we had to rely there. So there are kind of all the connections in prison for prisoners to rehabilitate, but they're just sometimes faulty, and I think if you go in for a very short sentence for, kind of less than 2 years, remember, you're going to do 40% of it now. You're going to be out on tag if you've got more than a sofa to go to. I think as a society, we need to, kind of ask, does that work? Does that work to prevent crime? Does that work to deter? Because some people, it's like the cost of doing business, isn't it? You go out, commit financial crime, and then every 3 or 5 years, you may go away for eight months. And at that point, you can detox, you're away from the alcohol, you can get fit in the gym, and then you may go out again and do what you're doing. So that's the balance, really.
I agree with you, John. I mean, it's interesting. I was listening to David Gork speak about this. He's done the review about sentences. He's doing it at the moment, I think this is soon to be adopted. In fact, you mentioned 40%, but actually sentences is going to change. So determinate sentences, you're going to serve a third in prison, then a third on licence, and then a third at risk, where you're not even managed, but you can be recalled if you commit further offences. So we're now looking at a third. So even for somebody who gets a maximum 10 years under the Fraud Act, they're looking at doing 3.5 years. And of course, Jonny, you'll know that somebody serving a sentence with under 4 years left to serve will generally go to open prison. So you can be category D if you've got less than 4 years to serve. So I can tell you myself, open prison really isn't much of a deterrent. When I was in the open prison, I was able to work in the community sort of 5 or 6 days a week at a charity shop or something. And then 5 days a month would be at home, what they call resettlement overnight release, ROR.
That's right.
Which was, supposed to help you to reintegrate and build family ties and get ready for rejoining the community. But actually, it was an opportunity for everyone to get absolutely pissed with their mates for 5 days. And I remember on my first ROR, this was, I can't get in trouble for saying this now. The sentence expired a long time ago, but this must have been back in sort of 2013. I got a ROR for 5 days from Hollesley Bay, open prison in Suffolk, so I was able to go home. And again, talking about fraud in prison, well, actually, I was sort of misleading the governor, because I said, I'm going to have a lovely time, be nice to hug my mother and so on, and have a nice time over Christmas. But I went skiing with my mates. I realised that my passport wasn't blocked, and I went skiing for 5 days.
No way. Oh my God.
I know.
That's a different level. I remember my first 5 days, but then it had been nearly 5 years because Grayling did the opposite of Gore. He tightened everything up. He had three people. One was called the Skullcracker. He kind of raided a building society whilst on Rottle, released on temporary license. So everything shrunk. I was in my first year. We were looking at 6 years away, and then I realised I wouldn't get to open so quickly, and I wouldn't have home leave until the last 15 months or something at the time. So it has come back, and I think that is important. Because I found, myself and my family found that very brutal. I can remember our first 5 days, though. I probably had a few glasses of wine, but I wasn't skiing or anything, Alex. But I could just remember it because, when I was offending, I used to travel to New York, Bermuda, wherever on this kind of Amex that I was given by my co-defendant. Had amazing holidays, Cape Town. But I truly say that 5 days was the best holiday I've ever had in my life. Just to come back and sleep in my own bed for 4 days and be able to take the boys to football and rugby or pick them up from school or take them to Barry Island Beach where I live close to. It was just amazing experience. And it was just reward, I think, for, everything that, I tried to do whilst in prison and and my family as well for being so loyal and supportive throughout. So, but yeah, no, there was many others that used to abuse that Rottle.
Yeah, absolutely. So there used to be a thing. So when you come back from a Rottle, so it's called release on temporary license. Me and the sort of pals I was in open prison with used to call Rottle rioting on the lash. So anyway, you'd often get drug tested and breathalyzed when you come back after a Rottle. So you knew you couldn't drink in the last sort of 24 hours, but people would work out that they could take cocaine and so on the first day or the first night of the Rottle, and then have just loads of orange juice and water for the rest of the time and not have any more cocaine, and then they'll test clear. And I think Rottle and ROR need to be reviewed because I don't think they're really helping anybody. When I was in Ford, actually, there was a guy who had a car parked round the corner that wasn't declared to the prison. The prison didn't know about it. So he used to sneak out at night at Ford, go and get his car, and he was burgling houses in Arundel, which is round the corner. So he was going out at night, burgling houses, and then going back to the prison to sleep. I wasn't there at this point, but there's a prison in the Isle of Sheppey called Stamford Hill. You'll know Jonny's
of course,
in prison. And there was a case, I think 2 or 3 years ago, where there was people were having their temporary license, and they were working for a haulage company. So prisoners were leaving each day and working for a haulage company. But it turned out that there was like £150 million conspiracy to import cocaine and heroin into the UK. And it was being discharged by these people who were in prison but released on temporary license each day, and they were going out. It was a big NCA bust in the end. But just a staggering abuse of trust.
Well, that's half the problem as well, Alex, because you know what it's like. Something like that happens at the prison you're in, and the shutters come down.
Yeah.
And it impacts everybody. So if you're trying to go up the ladders, not down the snakes, you're going to your snakes and ladders board. And I was in right at the end of my sentence. Obviously, COVID hit.
Yeah.
So literally, I went from, it was March, obviously 2020. I was due to go home for 5 days that Thursday for my eldest son's 13th birthday, and I'd missed 5 birthdays in a row. And we were so excited, and then that Boris Johnson announcement came out on the Tuesday night, and then we were all told no Rottle. So the last 3 months of my sentence, I was stuck on camp. Okay, it was, a lot of prisoners were stuck, in the BCAT jails behind the doors for 23 hours. At least we could go and walk and exercise. And
where were you, Jonny? By the way, were you in Ford?
I was in Prescoid. It's the Monmouthshire, just outside us. Right. Yeah, really, really beautiful area. For we had a farm where some of the offenders used to work up on the farm and how to farm. And then but similar, Alex. There's some working in the charity shops in Cardiff, in Cwmbran. Some went down to the Clink. We used to have a Clink at HMP Cardiff, I used to actually go to university on the Clink bus, and it was carnage. And they used to want to stop everywhere on the way back so that booze could be picked up or somebody could have a massage or something. It was bonkers. So I'd be sitting at the back carrying, just thinking, if they get busted, then I'm not going to be saying anything, am I? So we're all going to get busted. So that was challenging. Getting the Clink bus, and then I was teaching as well at the time, so I'd then be doing a 10 o'clock criminology seminar with kind of 15 students.
So you were teaching whilst you were in Oak
Yeah. When I was doing my doctorate at Cardiff, and then you're allowed to be a graduate tutor as well. So I would run, kind of several workshops and get just paid by the hour as well. So it was pretty fantastic.
Did you have to give
surreal
40% to the prison?
I didn't. It wasn't enough actually, because it was only by the hour. I think it was because they don't allow you to do too many hours because it'll interrupt, or affect your studies then. So that was bonkers. But yeah, no, those big. We can share some great stories like that, Alex, about the way in which people kind of abuse the system or.
Yeah. So we used to get, when I was in Holsey Bay, we used to get a minibus to Ipswich each day, and it was like a prison bus. Everyone's going to their little jobs in the community. Then on the way back, we obviously people used to pick up booze and KFC and all this sort of thing. And me and a couple of guys used to go and have a sunbed. So I was having sunbed 3 or 4 times a week. So going back to prison with this sort of golden glow.
Yeah, we had the same. Anybody before kind of a home leave where they were going home to their wife or girlfriend, it'd be sunbeds, kind of trimming up or doing the gardening or whatever. So it'd be all that kind of vanity project, wouldn't it?
So if we think, contrast that to the first 2 weeks of the sentence, it does get better, doesn't it? It gets.
Yes, it does get better. It was tolerable then, wasn't it? Because we were either working or I was studying and seeing much more of the family, as well as the 5 days, Claire. We were having 2 days out as well. Every fortnight you could have a Sunday out. So my wife would, but it was kind of 50-minute drive for her, and you're only out for up to 8 hours. So she'd pick me up, and then we'd go to the rugby club to watch one of the boys play. Sunday lunch, afternoon, checking the boys' homework, and then back again. And that was tough. Every journey back was,
going back was
tearful, and the boys struggled with that. But so.
Yeah, absolutely.
So interesting. In terms of work that you guys did whilst you're inside, Alex, you were, I can't remember the term, is it like a listener or something where you were...
Oh, that was, I mean, that's not paid work. It's kind of like the listeners scheme is a very worthy idea, and it's run by the Samaritans, and people are trained up, and if somebody's feeling suicidal, they can press their bell and speak to a listener. But in reality, the scheme was being abused by people who just wanted to have a bit more trust and be able to get out of their cell, so listeners could get out of their cell if they're called, if they're on duty. It's seen as a sort of trusted role, but in the prisons I was in, especially in Wandsworth, the scheme was often abused to move drugs between wings, move tobacco between wings. So somebody on C wing would ring the bell and ask for a listener. They'd know the listener would be on Trinity wing, and they'd bring, they'd move stuff around the prison. And then in COVID, I think it did stop. The whole listener scheme came to an end because people couldn't transfer or walk between wings. So in a lot of the prisons, so I was in High Point, and there was a complete block on inter-wing movement. So people were given phones. So if you didn't have a phone in your cell, you'd be given a mobile phone, like a Nokia phone, which was sort of locked down, but you could call your family and you could call listeners if you needed to. So the scheme sort of came to an end. I imagine it's restarted. I don't know. It's a very worthy idea, but in reality, and I don't want to get sued by the Samaritans, but it is rife for abuse.
I agree with Alex there. It was. I think it was. It could be very effective, but the way in which it was abused to kind of transport contraband, etc. Around the prison.
In fact, the prison authorities, so the officers and the governors I'd speak to said that anyone who the people that do commit suicide in prison, there are quite a few. 99% of them never call a listener.
Wow.
The people they're trying to reach don't want to have that assistance. So it's more for people that are self-harming, I think. rather than thinking about ending their lives.
And is that something that you signed up for? Is it because you just needed to pass the time, if I'm being completely frank, or is it because you genuinely wanted to?
No, it just got me out the cell, and it's good to so I knew when I was going to apply for my DCAT, so open prison. When I was going to apply for that, it would look good if I was a listener, and it would be good to have a letter of support from the Samaritan lady that came in.
Right.
So it's really just playing the system, and I guess as a sort of, social engineer, it was a good thing to be able to do.
Yeah, I agree with Alex. You wanted a bit of a CV in prison, so I was a listener. I did something with the Red Cross. I was a kind of family coach, was working in education. So you build up a CV. So every time your Oasis report is updated, then all of that goes in. So it will then allow you to navigate more effectively and efficiently through the system. But the other side of that is that I quite enjoy doing it. I could see abuse with other listeners, but I did quite enjoy contributing something. That was all part of regaining some self-respect that you traded whilst you offended. There are lots, of initiatives like that. But as Alex said, it was unpaid, it's voluntary, and it got you out of the cell. But sometimes you would kind of, you'd have the light go on at 2 a.m. because somebody's going bonkers because their girlfriend's just split with them or whatever, and you'd have to go out in the middle of the night. So, yeah.
The worst, Jonny, I don't know if you had this. I had this a few times. Getting woken up at sort of 3 or 4 in the morning, and you go, and the officer takes you to the listener's suite where the guy will be sitting. So the officers will move him first from his cell wherever he is to the listener's suite, and then I'd go to the listener's suite, and then the officers would wait outside, and sit down and say, "Hello, I'm Alex. I'm a listener. How are you feeling? Tell me how you're feeling." He's like, "All right, mate. I've got a cigarette."
Yeah.
And he just wanted a cigarette, and he woke me up for that, and he wasn't.
Yeah. No, I had that. Luckily, I wasn't a smoker. I don't know if you were, Alex, but so people just wanted, a cigarette, some company. We used to go actually in the offender's cell. We didn't have a prison. We didn't have a kind of a suite, so you'd literally go out in the middle of the night and sit on A or B block with them. But
yeah, no, I did a bit of that. I remember when I was so I've done most prisons in London and the southeast.
Show off.
Yeah, I was going to write the good prison guide.
Yeah.
When I was in Pentonville, there wasn't a listener's suite, and I had to go and speak to this guy that was. He was stressed because he was facing a life sentence. He was on trial for murder. He was in the middle of this trial and he couldn't sleep. I felt really bad for him. But in his cell, it was filthy, and he'd been smoking crack, and you can smell it. When somebody's been smoking crack because they burn an orange peel. I don't know if you came across this, Jonny. They burn an orange peel to disguise the smell of crack. But the burning orange peel stinks bad.
It's worse, yeah.
Yeah. So I went to his cell, and it was just this sort of squalid environment, and it, really unpleasant. I just sort of holding my breath and trying to counsel him.
Did you at ever time feel completely threatened in prison, Alex? Did you come up to a situation where it could have kicked off adversely against you?
Not against me, no, and I don't know why, but I've managed to get through 43 years on this earth without ever being attacked or hit in the face. But I have seen, like, I remember when I was in Thameside, the prison completely lost control of the wing I was on. There was like one officer was put in a chokehold. There was like 30 prisoners against like 3 or 4 officers.
Wow.
One officer was put in a chokehold. Another prisoner took off his belt, hid his radio, took his baton off him, and then was using the baton to hit other people. And they lost total control. And I was thinking, shit, like this is pretty dangerous. So I got in my cell and shut the door because you can lock from the inside. So I locked myself on the inside. I was sort of watching it all out the flat. And then they had to get the riot team in. I can't remember what they're called, tornadoes.
Yeah. Like come in or like Tackleberry off Police Academy, isn't it?
So they all turned up and restored order. But it was really crazy stuff to witness. And so I think that was the time that I felt unsafe, is when I thought that the prison had lost control of the place.
Yeah, I could understand that's very unnerving, and there's going to be consequences to everybody.
Yeah,
You're going to have a lot of lockdown now.
we were locked down for 3 days, I think, and then
So it impacts them.
Yeah.
Nobody goes out to work. Visits are cancelled. So it's it does affect everybody.
Not good.
There was a big riot probably around 2016 in Birmingham.
Yeah, so
The old Winston Green. So what they did there is they ship out. So we ended up having 30 or 40 prisoners down in South Wales from the Birmingham area just to disperse it. Any troublemakers, anybody that they think was associated with the riot. So. So.
And tell me a bit about your academic side, the research you're doing. How has your prison experience influenced that? Does it change how you view things now, or?
Yeah. I think when I was doing my masters between 2016 and 18, as Alex will know, you don't have the internet in there. So my wife was sending secondhand textbooks in. Portsmouth University, Mark Button was emailing journal articles, the print and whatever. So it was very kind of organic way of learning. It was back to how I used to, when I went to university in the late 80s, really. So there was huge challenges. So for my dissertation, I did kind of an auto-ethnographic study of solicitor enablers and fraud, because, it was all knowledge I had. So that made that a bit easier. So that's where I got the interest in actually doing more research into financial crime, the role of professional enablers, and that was where my doctoral research came from. But I also do criminal justice stuff. I work with the Prison Education Trust. I don't know if Alex had any funding off them, but so it's just working with some of these NGOs and charities and seeing what sort of impact they're having in the prison system, whether or not they're providing something that is invaluable and supportive of rehabilitation and restorative justice. There's a kind of a sub-discipline of criminology called convict criminology. So I see myself as a convict criminologist in a way. But then a lot of research from convict criminologists is normally about the state of prisons or sentencing and whatever. But whereas my research is into mortgage fraud, how to spot it, how to identify it, what are the crime commission processes of a mortgage or bank fraud, what are the cues for intervention by preventers, victims or law enforcement, etc. So that's where I'm quite proud of the research I've done, because whilst I can't repay those huge amounts of money that Entwistle defrauded and I facilitated, I at least can offer something now about how financial crimes are organised, what professional enablers you need, what other crime commissioning processes are. So that's quite a good thing to pull away. So
it's funny to hear you talk about a convict criminologist. I had in mind a criminologist with shackles on his feet.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Well, they are. In America, you got obviously huge sentences out there, and some prisoners will turn to books, turn to education. They'll do a degree, do a master's. Some of them, I've had a few prisoners in the UK reach out to me to see whether or not I'd supervise them on a PhD they're doing.
Wow.
So it's but unfortunately, as Alex knows, it's a very, very small minority, very small percentage. And the important thing is like organisations like the Shannon Trust that assist literacy in prisons. It's about seeing if prisoners who were perhaps excluded from education, see whether or not they can do GCSEs, whether or not they can progress to A levels. But it's not just education, it's vocational training as well. The burglars you were talking about, Alex, make sure they can learn a trade whilst they're in, see if they can then go legitimate outside. That's where David Gore needs to focus his attention on education, vocational training, because that then you get a better chance of changing pathway. If you leave prison, you've got a little bit in the bank because you've been working at open prison, so you can put a deposit down on a flat. You're connected to your family, maybe kind of obviously paying towards your child by way of benefits, and then you've got more chance, I think, of walking away from offending and a criminal lifestyle, really.
So did you
agree
know?
with that?
Totally. Yeah, education's the key. And you mentioned Shannon Trust. Did they run a scheme called Toe by Toe?
Yes, exactly.
I
It was
used to
just
be
kind of
I used to do that. So I was a toe-by-toe mentor. And I remember teaching a young guy from the travelling community how to read.
that's right. Well, the
So many
literacy,
of those
yeah,
people can't read anything.
I know.
They have a sort of functional knowledge. So on the canteen sheet, for example, he'd recognise the make of the cigarette or the tobacco he'd like to want.
Yeah.
He'd know how to read Amber Leaf, or he know he wants a Snickers. He'd know what Snickers was.
Yeah.
But couldn't read a book, or couldn't write. And I think that I don't know what the stats are. I mean, is it like between a third and a half of prisoners are completely illiterate?
Yes, well, yes, certainly a third. It could be even
Could be more, yeah.
above that. And certainly, as you say, with the travelling community as well, there's a high level of, not just literacy, but numeracy as well.
Yeah.
But then it's, I don't know if you remember this, Alex, but it wasn't as if, when you met your offender manager, they just wanted to make sure that you were, going to work, whether or not it's education or you're having visits. When you got sentence planning targets, you really should be identifying what that offender should be doing. And, if somebody has literacy problems, they should be attempting to read, and that should be measured. But there doesn't seem to be any kind of targeted support per offender, really. So
really funny, yeah, really interesting. I totally agree. There's one course that I was made to do, and I think most people with a financial conviction or fraud conviction will be made to do this. But it's a course called Money Management. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah.
So I did this money management course, which was run by this nice volunteers from a local church in Wandsworth that come in and do this course, and it would teach you the benefit of buying your baked beans in Lidl as opposed to Waitrose, and it will show you how much you could save if on a weekly shop you could save £12.50 if you buy your stuff here and there. And anyway, on one of the final sessions we did a budget planning session, and I don't know if you remember Jeffrey Revel Rees, Jonathan.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Jeff was a huge character. He was in, he's an Australian dude. He was my cellmate for about a year and a half, and he was inside for a massive, a very cruel boiler room fraud, and they'd been defrauding pensioners of their life savings. But he netted about £160 million. I remember in this budgeting session, the lady said, "Right, can you just write out all your monthly expenses, like just the month before you came to prison?" And he was thinking, okay, and he'd literally written all this stuff out. He said, mortgage repayment £25,000, private jet hire £160,000, all this stuff written out. His eye watering, so much money. And this woman looked at it and she sort of shook her head. She said, I mean, if you save £12.50 a week by shopping at Lidl, I don't think it's really going to make any difference.
Oh, brilliant!
It was quite. I mean, but that course really was all they offered for financial offenders. It had very limited value.
Yeah.
Scary, very, very scary. We've got 5 minutes. I could talk to you about this all day. I'm learning so much. I think from my perspective, working in financial services, my sort of role stops when you submit the SAR to the NCA and then you sort of never see it again, and then you're on to the next case. So that's kind of where my knowledge, I guess, of what happens after that ends, because I just don't see it. I've never been in a role that has allowed me to sort of go beyond that point. So to be able to sort of see the other side of it has been super, super interesting. Final thoughts from you then, Alex. What did prison teach you? Has it changed you in any way? What needs to change in general? Any thoughts?
I think, well, between the first and second sentences, it taught me how to be a better criminal. It didn't rehabilitate me at all. I was reading a very interesting study by Shad Maruna. I'm sure you've come across this, Jonny. This guy has looked at why people decide to desist, and he's decided that prison really doesn't drive desistance. You have to make a decision, and it's clear from earlier in this session, Jonny, that you made that decision before you even went to prison. you decided to desist and you decided to rehabilitate, you have to make a conscious decision to rehabilitate. Prison can't make you do it. So I think that's my conclusion on prison. It doesn't, it warehouses people. It can help if somebody's particularly dangerous to society to have them off the streets, but when it comes to rehabilitation, it doesn't really do anything. As you said, Jonny, it's really more about punishment.
Yeah, and it was brutal punishment.
Yeah,
I wanted to take that brutal experience in order to, change me as a person. Like I said, I knew I was going to go to prison for a long time. Even when I was facilitating fraud for myself and my wife would go on a holiday, I'm lying on a sunbed and I'm reading a crime book and it's prison. I think, I know I'm going to end up there. So it was that, kind of realization of how significant the fraud that I was involved with was, and how it was just a matter of spinning plates. As soon as the first one went, it would start this whole cycle. And I felt very relieved when it went and I couldn't go. I resigned and I was shut down. I was struck off because it just meant I wouldn't have to go back and, reoffending for end whistle, etc. So, but no, prison was brutal. It was hard on my family, really hard and challenging. But I feel as if, now I've regained that self-respect that I traded so wastefully when I was offending. I can look in my dad's shaving mirror now and, I couldn't do that when I was offending and traveling down to see him in a Range Rover and, having this kind of, supposedly on the face of this, very good professional life. So for me, it worked. It's just, it was hard. It was hard, the homesickness and the impact it had on my family. So.
Well, that is all we have time for. Thank you so much to Alex and to Jonny for joining me today to discuss fraud and prisons. My name's Claire Maillet, and this is Fraudible.